Moscow, USSR. Summer 1974. The air over a secluded courtyard near the Arbat district is thick with the dust of a dry Soviet summer. A KGB counterintelligence officer, his civilian suit a dark slash against the bleached concrete, stands motionless by a third-floor window. His eyes, trained for anomalies, sweep the routine scene. Babushkas on benches, a Zil car parked unattended, the lazy flutter of pigeons. Then a flicker at the edge of his vision. Something moves against the heat haze near the fortified facade of a neighbouring institution. It is too large for a wasp, too erratic for a sparrow. Its flight path is a series of sharp mechanical jerks, a stuttering advance toward a specific high window. Sun glints, not on insect chitin, but on a minuscule, manufactured surface. For a fraction of a second, the object hovers, a silent, alien spectator at the heart of Soviet power. The officer's breath catches. He reaches for his binoculars, but the moment dissolves. The object veers, caught by a sudden thermal, and disappears behind a rain gutter. The courtyard returns to its mundane rhythm. But in the mind of the KGB man, a silent alarm has been tripped. A report will be filed, marked with suspicion. An investigation will be opened into an incident with no evidence, no witness, only a lingering and profound sense of disquiet. The hunter has seen a ghost. And the ghost was made of balsa wood, watch parts, and audacious imagination. This was not a bird, it was not a bug. It was a signal from the future, sent from a CIA workshop. The age of the micro-drone had begun, not on a battlefield, but in the silent, nerve-wracking theatre of spies. To understand the sheer audacity of the dragonfly, one must first map the prison it was designed to infiltrate. Moscow in the 1970s was not merely a city. It was a counterintelligence fortress, arguably the most hostile and controlled operational environment on Earth for a Western intelligence officer. They were born from bitter experience. Assume you're under constant surveillance. Assume your apartment, your car, your office is comprehensively bugged. Assume every Soviet citizen you meet is reporting to the KGB. Assume any electronic communication is instantly intercepted. This was not paranoia, it was the baseline reality. The KGB's second chief directorate, responsible for internal counterintelligence and crushing foreign espionage, operated with near omniscient resources. They deployed box surveillance, a suffocating technique where teams of up to 24 officers would rotate in shifts, physically encircling a CIA operative in public, creating a moving human prison. The city was a web of honey traps, compromised apartments fitted with hidden cameras and microphones, and spy dust, a chemical agent used to track contacts. The human asset, the classic Moscow-based spy, was virtually extinct. Dead drops were discovered. Brush passes were intercepted. The physical and psychological pressure was immense. The KGB owned the ground, the airwaves, and the streets. They had turned the city into a panopticon where the watchers were always watching, and the walls themselves seemed to listen. This created an asymmetric crisis for the CIA. Intelligence gathering on Soviet strategic capabilities, missile silos, research facilities, leadership intentions had hit a wall. Satellite imagery, national technical means, provided the broad view, but could not peer into workshops or read documents on a desk or snatch whispers from a closed room. Human intelligence, the lifeblood of espionage, had been systematically choked off at its source. The need was clear, desperate, and seemingly impossible. Find a way to place an invisible ear and eye inside the most heavily guarded territory in the world without using a human being. The solution would not come from the field but from a laboratory. It demanded a fundamental reimagining of the spy itself. It required moving from the world of trench coats and microfilm to the world of microengineering and biomimicry. The mission was to build a ghost that could fly. While KGB officers perfected the art of the shadow, a quiet revolution was underway 7,000 kilometers away, in the wooded suburbs of Langley, Virginia, and in unmarked facilities across the United States. The CIA's response to the Moscow impasse was not to train better spies, but to invent new ones. This mandate fell to a uniquely visionary group, the Office of Research and Development, ORD. Its culture was not one of clandestine meetings, but of whiteboards, prototyping labs, and seemingly outlandish brainstorming sessions. The directorate attracted a rare breed: engineers, physicists, biologists, and craftsmen who viewed espionage problems as technical puzzles. Their portfolio was a catalogue of Cold War wonder weapons: the U-2 and SR-71 spy planes for altitude, the Corona satellite for space, and miniature cameras for concealment. But by the early 1970s, the focus turned inward to the micro scale. The challenge of Moscow demanded a paradigm shift from global overflight to intimate, localized penetration. The ORD began exploring the concept of biological mimicry, using machines that imitated living creatures. Birds and insects were the obvious models. They were ubiquitous, invisible to the human eye in their natural context, and granted access to places no human could ever go. Parallel efforts were already in motion. One path led to ornithopters, mechanical birds. Another, more radical path looked to the insect world. Early experiments were crude, radio-controlled beetles with implanted electrodes, a concept explored by multiple intelligence agencies. But control was unreliable. The true breakthrough was the idea of a self-contained, miniature, artificial insect, a device that carried its own power, propulsion, guidance, and payload. The technological hurdles were staggering. It required micro-miniaturization years ahead of commercial capability. Power was the eternal constraint. Batteries were heavy and weak. Aerodynamics at such a small scale were poorly understood. The physics of insect flight were a mystery. Guidance required a stabilization system smaller than a fingernail. Yet, the ORD pressed on. The project, which would later acquire the declassified name Insectothopter, was born from this crucible of necessity and wild innovation. It was not a weapon of war, but a sensor of supreme subtlety. Its design parameters were a manifesto of the new espionage: small enough to be mistaken for fauna, quiet enough to be drowned out by a breeze, agile enough to navigate urban canyons, and intelligent enough to complete a mission. It was an attempt to master nature's design for a singular purpose: to slip through the iron bars of the KGB's perfect prison and listen to its secrets. The dragonfly was taking shape, not as a creature of evolution, but as a child of the Cold War's most desperate and creative minds. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit laboratories of the CIA's ORD, the Insectothopter was not merely a project, it was an obsession. The team assigned to it was a blend of aerodynamicists, watchmakers, and electrical engineers. Their leader was a practical visionary, a man whose name remains classified, but whose ethos was clear: solve the impossible, 1 milligram at a time. For these scientists, the KGB was an abstract force, a set of constraints in a physics problem. Their adversary was not a person, but the laws of thermodynamics, material science, and fluid dynamics. Their workspace was a cluttered sanctuary of precision, lathes for machining components finer than a toothpick, microscopes for assembly, benchtops littered with prototypes of wings made from shaved balsa wood and mylar film, each thinner than a human hair. The heart of the dragonfly was its engine, a miniature reciprocating piston motor, no larger than a shirt button, powered by a tiny canister of pressurized gas. It was a masterpiece of microengineering inspired by the mechanics of a watch. The propulsion was not from a rotating propeller, but from the frantic, precise up and down motion of the wings, replicating the complex aerodynamics of a real dragonfly's flight. The human factor here was one of isolated, intense focus. They worked in a bubble, shielded from the operational nightmares of Moscow. Their satisfaction was measured in milliseconds of stable hover, in grams of weight shaved off the airframe, in the successful integration of a grain-sized optical sensor. They were builders of the singular perfect tool for a single perfect mission. Their motivation was the pure challenge of creation, a world away from the ideological trench warfare of the Cold War. Contrast this with the human element on the receiving end. The KGB officer assigned to investigate reports of anomalous aerial objects near sensitive facilities was a creature of a different ecosystem. He was a product of the Chekist tradition, suspicious, methodical, and steeped in the doctrine that every anomaly was a threat. His world was one of human frailty, betrayal, greed, fear. He understood treasonous whispers, the sweat on a source's brow, the pattern of a dead drop. He did not understand balsa wood and micropistons. The very concept they described seemed to violate his understanding of espionage tradecraft. It represented a fundamental shift that his training had not prepared him for: the dehumanization of the spy. His bafflement was not just technical, it was existential. He was hunting a man, but the CIA had stopped sending men. They were sending machines that mimicked nature. The hunter and the inventor were locked in the same struggle, but they no longer spoke the same language or even inhabited the same century. The CIA's Insectothopter, declassified in the early 2000s, stands as a testament to 1970s micro-engineering audacity. It was not merely a miniature drone, it was a symphony of miniaturized systems, each pushing the period's technological limits. To examine it is to understand the precise nature of the miracle its creators attempted to will into existence. The airframe. The body was carved from high-density balsa wood, selected for its exceptional strength-to-weight ratio. It measured just over 6 inches, 15 centimeters in length, with a wingspan to match. Every gram was accounted for. The wood was sanded to a fragile thinness, a structure lighter than a stack of a dozen business cards. The wings were optical quality mylar, a film thinner than a human hair, stretched over a fine wire frame. They were designed not for lift in the conventional sense, but for the complex vortices of insect-scale flight. The engine, the heart of the miracle. This was the core breakthrough. Instead of an electric motor, which at the time required heavy batteries, the ORD engineers devised a miniature reciprocating piston engine. It was a marvel of precision machining, smaller than a dime. It ran on pressurized gas, likely a common refrigerant like Freon, stored in a tiny internal canister. The expanding gas drove a piston connected to a crankshaft which converted linear motion into the rapid, oscillating up and down stroke of the wings. This power plant could achieve a wing beat frequency comparable to a real insect, generating the necessary thrust and instability that defined its darting flight. Guidance and control, the fragile mind. This was the system's most notorious vulnerability. The Insectothopter lacked an onboard computer. Microprocessors in the 1970s were room-sized. Guidance was provided by a miniature, pre-programmed guidance system using a laser beam. The concept was elegant in theory. An operative on a nearby rooftop would aim a low-power laser at the drone. Photovoltaic cells on the drone's tail would detect the laser's position, and a simple analog circuit would command servo mechanisms to adjust the tail rudder, steering the Insectothopter along the laser's path. It was a system of exquisite delicacy, allowing for remote control without emitting a radio frequency signal the KGB could intercept. The payload, the reason for being. In its operational concept, the dragonfly's payload was its purpose. This could be a grain-sized capacitive microphone to capture conversations through open windows, or a micro-dot camera for document surveillance. The entire vehicle was, in essence, a disposable delivery system for a single, priceless sensor. Its mission was one of intimate proximity. To perch on a windowsill, to cling to a curtain, to become part of the ambient environment long enough to steal a secret. Yet for all its brilliance, the Insectothopter was a creature of profound fragility. Its kryptonite was the very environment it was meant to conquer, the weather. A gust of wind stronger than a gentle breeze could send it tumbling. Rain was fatal. The laser guidance demanded a clear line of sight in a city of obstructions. It was a fair weather spy, a technological diamond. Brilliant, but brittle. Its existence proved a concept, while also exposing the chasm between laboratory triumph and field operational reality. Possessing a miniature marvel in a Virginia laboratory was one thing. Inserting it into the heart of Moscow, deploying it against a specific target, and successfully recovering intelligence was a logistical and tactical nightmare of an entirely different magnitude. The operational plan for the Insectothopter was a house of cards, where every stage introduced a catastrophic point of failure. Stage 1. Infiltration. The dragonfly itself could not fly from Langley. It had to be smuggled into the USSR, a country where every piece of Western luggage was subject to meticulous search. The device would need to be broken down into harmless-looking components. The airframe disguised as a piece of folk art, the engine as a novelty trinket, the guidance electronics embedded in a harmless radio. A CIA technical officer operating under deep cover would then have to reassemble it in a safe house, itself a perilous assumption in KGB-saturated Moscow. The assembly required a watchmaker's skill, steady hands, and a silent, secure room that likely did not exist. Stage 2. Deployment. Imagine the scenario. The targeting officer identifies a window, perhaps on the third floor of a Soviet microelectronics institute. The operative, carrying a briefcase containing the assembled insectothopter and its laser guidance unit, must now gain access to a launch point with a clear line of sight. This could be a rooftop, a nearby apartment, or a park bench. Each location presented immense risks. A man on a rooftop with a strange device was asking for immediate detention. The launch had to be perfectly still. Any wind would spell instant mission failure. The moment the tiny machine whirred to life, it would produce a faint but potentially audible mechanical buzz, an unnatural sound in the quiet of a Soviet courtyard. Stage 3. The flight and collection. This was the most delicate dance. The operative, now a laser marksman, must guide the fluttering device dozens or hundreds of meters through urban air currents onto a specific windowsill, all while maintaining an invisible, unbroken beam. The dragonfly had no obstacle avoidance. A stray power line, a tree branch, a sudden pigeon. Any could be a crash event. Once on station, it had to maintain position, its microphones listening, for a useful duration. Its power was finite, measured in minutes. Then it had to be guided back to a recovery point, a feat even more difficult than the outbound journey, as it would now be laden with its recorded data. Stage 4. Exfiltration. Finally, the physical intelligence, a tape, a film canister, had to be retrieved from the device and smuggled out of the country. The dragonfly itself would likely be destroyed or abandoned. Each of these stages was a vector for KGB detection. The plan required perfect weather, perfect execution, and a staggering amount of luck. It was the ultimate high-risk, high-reward gambit, where the reward was a snippet of conversation and the risk was the exposure of the CIA's most advanced technical espionage program and the capture of a valuable officer. The puzzle was not just technical, but profoundly human, testing nerves and judgment in the world's most pressurized environment. The KGB of the 1970s was a colossal, hyper-efficient machine for controlling human behavior. Its genius lay in understanding people, their weaknesses, ambitions, and fears. Its vast apparatus was optimized to identify, pressure, and turn human assets, or to paralyze them with dread. Its counterintelligence doctrine was built on a foundational assumption: the enemy would send a man. All its protocols, from surveillance to interrogation, were anthropocentric. This created a profound, if hidden, vulnerability: technological latency. The Soviet Union excelled at espionage tradecraft and grand monumental engineering, missiles, tanks, satellites. But the subtle, agile, micro-scale innovation happening in the CIA's ORD was alien to its institutional culture. The KGB's scientific directorates were focused on countering known threats, bugging devices, radio transmissions, cipher machines. Their mindset was reactive, analytical, and grounded in the physics they understood. When the first inklings of the insectothopter program potentially reached the KGB through moles or technical intelligence, they likely encountered a cognitive barrier. The reports would have described a miniature, unmanned, insect-like reconnaissance vehicle. To the Chekist mind, trained on decades of human intelligence warfare, this could easily be dismissed as disinformation, a fantastical provocation, or the paranoid ramblings of an overzealous junior officer. The concept violated their core tenets of how espionage was conducted. It represented a lateral shift they were not prepared to defend against. The KGB's strength was also its weakness in this new domain. Its legendary suspicion worked against observable humans, not against engineered fauna. A guard might be trained to spot a nervous man in a crowd, but not to scrutinize every dragonfly near a restricted window. Their electronic countermeasures swept for radio waves, not the faint flicker of a laser beam modulating photovoltaic cells. Their physical security was designed to stop individuals, not insects. The true moment of bafflement would not have been one of mere confusion, but of institutional dissonance. It was the shock of a paradigm shift. For the KGB officer tasked with writing the assessment report, the challenge was existential. How do you draft a security bulletin for something that sounds like science fiction? How do you order your teams to scan the skies for insects? The very act of taking the threat seriously risked professional ridicule. The dragonfly, therefore, wielded a psychological weapon before it ever collected a bite of intelligence. It forced the world's most powerful security apparatus to question the fundamental boundaries of the possible, revealing that their perfect prison might have bars too wide to stop a new kind of ghost. The scenario is hypothetical, but built from the declassified capabilities, known CIA tradecraft, and the specific vulnerabilities of the Soviet system. It is early autumn 1975. The target is not the Kremlin, but a lesser-known jewel, Research Institute number 37 in the outskirts of Moscow, a facility tasked with microelectronics for military guidance systems. The CIA has a blind spot. They know the institute's output, but not the breakthrough happening in Laboratory 4, a leap in circuit miniaturization that could shrink the guidance packages for Soviet ICBMs. The Moscow station receives the tasking: get auditory confirmation of the project's status and lead scientist. Satellite imagery shows Laboratory 4 has a row of high, narrow windows, one of which is habitually cracked open for ventilation. It is a target of exquisite difficulty and potential reward. The asset is Cicada, a CIA technical operations officer under diplomatic cover. For 3 weeks, he conducts dry runs. He times the pedestrian traffic, charts the wind patterns in the Institute's inner courtyard, and from a rented room in a distant, taller building confirms a laser line of sight to the target window is just possible, if fragile. The insectothopter, smuggled in parts inside a hollowed-out textbook binding and a child's toy, is assembled on a night of utter stillness. D-Day, 14:30 Moscow time. The weather is ideal. Clear, 18 degrees Celsius, wind under 3 knots. Cicada is in position in his rented room, curtains drawn, a textbook on Soviet agriculture open on the desk. Beside it lies the insectothopter, its mylar wings shimmering. The laser guidance unit, disguised as a slide projector component, is set on a tripod by the window sash. His heart rate is controlled, his movements deliberate. This is the pinnacle of technical espionage. At 14:47, he activates the gas cylinder. A faint hiss, then a low, rhythmic brrrr fills the silent room. The dragonfly's wings become a blur. He opens the window a bare 6 inches, and with a gentle toss, launches the device into the void. It dips, wobbles, then finds its equilibrium, hanging in the air like a wary living thing. Cicada picks up the laser, the beam invisible in the afternoon light. He paints the tail of the machine. The photovoltaic cells register the signal. The dragonfly responds, turning with a jerky motion, and begins its journey across the 200-meter chasm of open space. The flight is a white-knuckle ballet. Every minor thermal is a mountain, every dust devil a potential crash. Cicada's world shrinks to the view through his stabilizing monocular and the feel of the laser's micro-adjustment dial under his fingertip. The device approaches the Institute's wall, rises vertically, a mechanical spider on an invisible thread, homing in on the cracked window of Laboratory 4. It is now a mere 10 meters from its perch. The mission is on the razor's edge of success. The tiny microphone is live, waiting to capture the first clear snippet of a conversation that could alter the strategic calculus of the Cold War. The insectothopter's final approach is its most vulnerable moment. At a distance of 5 meters from the window, a phenomenon known as the ground effect, the disruption of aerodynamic forces near a large surface, combined with a slight, unpredictable eddy of wind spilling from the laboratory's ventilation crack, destabilizes its flight. The laser guidance system, operating at its effective limit, cannot compensate quickly enough. The device pitches violently to the right. Instead of alighting gracefully on the windowsill, it strikes the brick wall of the Institute with a faint but audible tick. It tumbles downward, a tumbling leaf of balsa and mylar, and comes to rest not on the street, but in a narrow, gravel-covered maintenance alley between 2 wings of the building, a blind spot for casual observation, but within the Institute's secured perimeter. Inside Laboratory 4, a junior technician near the window hears the odd sound. He glances out, sees nothing but a fleeting shadow, and dismisses it as a bird. The mission, however, has terminally failed. The dragonfly is down, its pressurized gas spent, its delicate structure likely fractured. The discovery occurs 2 hours later during a routine perimeter sweep by a Vokrani guard, a member of the militarized facility security force, not a KGB officer. His trained eye spots an anomaly in the grey gravel, a speck of shimmering film and a sliver of painted wood that does not belong. He retrieves the object with care, placing it in a handkerchief. The guard's report is dutiful, moving up the chain from Institute Security to the KGB's Third Directorate, responsible for counterintelligence within the Soviet military and scientific establishment. The reaction is not immediate alarm, but profound curiosity. The item arrives on the desk of a mid-level KGB technical analyst later that evening. At first glance, under a desk lamp, it appears to be a child's model or a peculiar trinket. But the analyst is thorough. He sees the precision of the machining on the tiny piston housing. He identifies the mylar as a Western material. He notes the microscopic photovoltaic cells on the tail assembly. Slowly, horrifyingly, the pieces assemble in his mind. This is not a toy. It is a manufactured object of exquisite complexity and clear purpose. The bafflement is now technical and tactical. A full alert is issued. KGB counterintelligence teams descend on Research Institute number 37. They scour the alley, interview the technician, and calculate possible launch points. Cicada's rented room is identified within 48 hours. But by then, he is on a plane to Vienna under standard rotation, the laser gear dismantled and discarded in separate parts across Moscow. The KFS has the evidence but not the spy. The dragonfly's carcass is flown under guard to the KGB's secretive scientific and technical directorate in Yasenevo. Here, under harsh lights, Soviet engineers perform a forensic autopsy. They reverse engineer its systems, marveling at its ingenuity and raging at its intrusion. They confirm its potential mission: espionage. The report that reaches the desk of the KGB chairman, Yuri Andropov, is a mixture of professional admiration and cold fury. It states a new, unsettling fact. The Americans are no longer just sending spies, they are sending artificial insects. The paradigm has shifted. The hunt for men must now be accompanied by a hunt for machines that hide in plain sight. The turning point is not a battle won or lost, but a veil being torn away, revealing a future for which the world's most formidable security service was utterly unprepared. In the strictest operational sense, the Insectothopter program was a technical success and an operational failure. It proved that a laser-guided, insect-scale aerial vehicle could be built and could fly. It pushed the boundaries of micro-miniaturization, material science and biomimetic design. Yet its fragility and the staggering operational difficulty of deploying it in a real-world denied area like Moscow likely prevented it from ever returning significant intelligence. The handful of devices built were, in essence, brilliant prototypes. But to judge the program solely by its lack of confirmed spy triumphs is to miss its profound historical impact. The Insectothopter was a seed crystal. It demonstrated a concept that would germinate for decades. Its true legacy lies in three distinct areas. First, it pioneered the conceptual framework for micro-UAVs. It forced the intelligence community to seriously consider the battlefield, or cityscape, at the insect scale. The problems it highlighted, power, guidance, stability, payload, became the central engineering challenges for future generations. While it used a gas-powered piston, its successors would await the revolution of miniature electric motors and lithium polymer batteries. Its laser guidance, though fragile, foreshadowed the use of optical and GPS-based navigation for tiny drones. Second, it directly inspired and validated follow-on CIA projects. The ORD did not abandon the concept. Rumors persist of attempts to build cyborg insects, live beetles or moths with implanted electronic control systems and sensors, a path that blended the Insectothopter's mission with the earlier, cruder electrode experiments. The dragonfly proved the investment was worthwhile, keeping the flame of microsurveillance research alive through the 1980s and into the nanotechnology age. Third, and perhaps most importantly, its declassification in 2003 served a strategic purpose. By revealing this 1970s marvel, the CIA demonstrated a long history of technological dominance in unconventional espionage. It was a signal to both adversaries and the public. If this is what we were building then, imagine what we have now. The Insectothopter, in a museum case or a documentary, became a potent piece of strategic messaging, a ghost from the past meant to shape perceptions of present capabilities. It cemented the image of the CIA as an organization that could and would pursue the seemingly impossible to gain an advantage. The dragonfly was not the end of the story. It was the proof of concept that whispered to future engineers. Smaller, lighter, smarter. It was the ancestor that made the modern palm-sized surveillance drone not just possible, but inevitable. The capture and analysis of the insectothopter sent a seismic tremor through the KGB's vast bureaucracy. It was a defensive intelligence coup that felt, paradoxically, like a profound failure. They had the machine, but it represented a breach of their cognitive defenses. The aftermath within the Soviet security apparatus was characterized by a mixture of intense research, operational paranoia, and institutional inertia. The immediate response was a classified scientific crash program. The KGB's Scientific and Technical Directorate, along with designated Soviet aerospace and entomological institutes, were tasked with two goals. First, to fully understand the American device, and second, to develop countermeasures and Soviet equivalents. Reports suggest the USSR initiated its own micro-drone research, though it was often hampered by the Soviet system's weaker microelectronics base and a culture less conducive to the rapid, quirky innovation that birthed the dragonfly. Their efforts likely produced larger, less sophisticated prototypes, reinforcing a pattern of technological catch-up. Operationally, the shockwave manifested in new, if sometimes surreal, security directives. Technical security sweeps began to include considerations beyond radio waves, checking for possible laser guidance paths into critical rooms. The psychological impact was significant. The KGB now had to consider every open window, every air vent, not just as a path for human intrusion, but for mechanical intrusion. The very environment had become suspect. This episode also fed directly into the KGB's deepening technological paranoia during the late Cold War. It became a data point in a disturbing pattern that included the discovery of sophisticated Western bugging devices in the USSR's Washington embassy and concerns about directed energy weapons. For Chairman Andropov, a technocrat who understood the power of information, the dragonfly reinforced the need for a fortress mentality. It justified greater resources for technical counterintelligence and likely influenced the aggressive, sometimes reckless, pursuit of Western technology through espionage, the Line X operations, to close the innovation gap. Yet the shockwave also exposed a core rigidity. The KGB was a leviathan. Turning its gaze from the human to the micro-mechanical was a slow, cumbersome process. The true cultural shift, to think like an engineer hunting a machine, not a Chekist hunting a traitor, was never fully achieved. The dragonfly, therefore, inflicted a lasting wound. It revealed that the KGB's greatest strength, its total control over the human landscape, could be circumvented by a piece of technology it struggled to even categorize. It was a silent announcement that the rules of the spy game had changed forever, and the side that mastered the marriage of silicon and stealth would own the future. The story of the insectothopter is not a tale of a decisive battle or a stolen secret. It is a parable about the nature of the Cold War itself, a conflict fought not just with ideologies and armies, but in the quiet spaces of imagination and engineering. The tiny dragonfly, fragile and fleeting, embodies the central paradox of that era, the pursuit of monolithic strategic advantage through the mastery of the minute. It represents the moment when espionage transcended the human form. The spy was no longer just a man with a camera, it could be a whisper of balsa wood and mylar, a ghost in the machine of the natural world. This shift was profound. It moved the high-stakes game of superpower rivalry into a realm where the rules were not yet written, where the only limits were the laws of physics and the ingenuity of scientists working under fluorescent lights an ocean away from their target. The KGB's bafflement, then, is the most human element of the story. It was the reaction of a colossal, historical force confronted by a future it could not immediately comprehend. Their confusion was the sound of one epoch grinding against the next. In the end, the insectothopter's greatest impact may not have been the intelligence it gathered, but the profound unease it sowed in the minds of its adversaries. A demonstration that the walls they had built, however high and thick, might be scaled by something they had never thought to guard against. Today, as micro-drones have evolved from fantastical prototypes to ubiquitous tools of war, commerce, and surveillance, the dragonfly's legacy is clear. It was a herald. It announced a world where the sky would never again be empty, where the boundary between the natural and the manufactured would blur in the service of information. It reminds us that the most significant revolutions often arrive not with a roar, but with the faint, mechanical buzz of wings, barely heard, already changing everything.